I'm Carmine Gallo with Brandel Chamblee, lead analyst for the Golf Channel, where he's worked since 2004. And we are here to elevate your game, not your swing. You can read Brandel's book for that, The Anatomy of Greatness, but we are here to elevate the art of conversation. If you want to be the most interesting person in the room, this is the guy you've got to hear from. Brandel, how you doing?
Pleasure. Nice to join you, Carmine. Looking forward to talking to you. And after this, actually diving into your books. As you know, as the invite came along, I started reading your stuff, and it very much falls in line with things that I'm greatly interested in. Writing and the spoken word. Every single day it seems like I have to say something about something I talked ad nauseum about the day before. So you have to say it a different way, and you have to continually engage. So I'm always looking for ways to improve in that manner.
Well, I think that's going to get to one of the reasons why you are so good at what you do as a sports commentator. And that's because you are constantly learning. You were an athlete first, a golfer, and then you made that transition to the analyst booth. So we'll talk about that. But Brandel, as I've watched you over the years, I consider you the Da Vinci of sports commentators. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. You bring a variety of input from different fields to your analysis: math, statistics, science, physics, art, and literature. We're going to break down your process. But first, I'd like to know, where did you find your passion for the spoken and the written word?
Well, when I was in school at the University of Texas, I studied communications, journalism, speech communications. So, it was not that easy, or certainly I didn't find it that easy to be gone for 3 weeks and come back and do economics. So, it's like, well, listen, I can write a speech when I'm gone. I can come back and deliver it, and everything should be fine. So I enjoyed debate. Growing up, I lived in a sort of a very active household of debaters, some lawyers and some pretty opinionated people running through my house. So, it was always dinner time, who could make the best argument, who could make everybody laugh the most, those kinds of things. So I grew up in a sort of I would say a vibrant, argumentative, sort of intellectual house that was, and nobody could beat my dad. He was just the best.
Yeah.
So, I guess growing up, and then went to school, and then, all the time while I played the tour, my favorite pastimes in the evening, because the hardest part about playing the tour is not being on the golf course. It's what you do when the sun goes down to the sun goes up. Lots of lonely hours. So my company, my favorite company, were writers, golf writers mostly. And, I'd sit around and I enjoy their turns of phrases and the way they looked at the game. And I looked for them for, sort of insights, but I just greatly enjoyed, sharing a couple of drinks and learning about how they write on deadline, those kinds of things.
That's fascinating. I just spoke to a legendary Navy admiral named James Stavridis, and he told me that he reads like 100 books a year. Him and Jim Mattis, who said are among the most well-read in the military. They have volumes of thousands of books. And he said that by being in their presence of great leaders of the past, it's a form of condensed knowledge. It's the most efficient way of getting all of this, of absorbing thousands of years of knowledge before us. And he said books acts as a stimulator for the mind. So just like a complex simulator for military soldiers, it's a simulator for the mind. You can put yourself in their shoes. Leaders, great leaders, read far more than others. And I think good commentators, whether they're in sports or other areas of television, or good public speakers, I have found they read more books than average, far more books than average. Do you find that, just maybe anecdotally?
I do, for sure. I'm a lover of books. I actually have, the books with me. I pack a bag of books every time I go on the road, and I'll, read, 20, 30 pages here on one book, and then put it down and start reading 20, 30 pages in another book. And I'm, always cycling through books as I go along, but it's not always just books. It's speeches, it's essays, anymore you can go to YouTube, which is like the Library of Congress of every great thought. And you can see, debates from, and scorching intellects of James Baldwin, Barbara Jordan, Maya Angelou, or Sam Harris, or Jordan Peterson. You can hear, or you can hear people expounding on Nietzsche, and you absorb all that, and the phrases, and you can find Winston Churchill speeches, and the cadence and the delivery and the word choices and the different ways that they go about making a point. I find it fascinating. I think I don't have enough time to read all the great books. So when people ask me if I read this current book or that current book, I'm like, well, no, and I'm not criticizing those books. I'm sure they're fabulous. I just don't have enough time to read those. It's like every great thought, every great idea, every genius has written something pretty much. And, I try to use my time wisely when I'm not working, and read those books and try to absorb those thoughts. And it helps me frame my arguments and debates and think and talk and write in different ways, and hopefully better ways.
Well, let's explore this transition that you made from professional athlete to sports analyst. You had an exceptional career on the PGA Tour, 15 years. You rose to 57th in the world. Most people don't know how hard that is. So you did have an exceptional career. And now you have an exceptional career as a widely admired commentator, sports commentator, and that's rarefied air as well. But here's the way I look at sports commentary from a communication perspective. I think there's 3 levels. The first level is functional. They're the play-by-play announcers, which is hard. It's hard to do. But they're the ones who break it down, the X's and O's. They can tell you his approach shot on the second hole sets him up well for birdie. Okay, play-by-play. Then there's the second level. They are the ones who add color commentary, typically through the use of stories. They bring you inside the ropes, as they say in golf. They can share those stories of how a player's inner demons, how they conquered their inner demons to get to where they are. They become much more interesting. But then there is this rarefied group of individuals who go from functional to riveting. They're people who you want to listen to. If I walked into a dinner party at some restaurant after a golf tournament and, Brandel Chamblee is at a table, I'm going to go to Brandel's table. I get Jim Nantz, Tony Romo, Collinsworth, Faraday, because of his humor and authenticity, Bob Costas, of course. But there's a handful that you really want to listen to because they add so much more. They turn any tournament into riveting theater. Brandel, take us through the process, because I think these are lessons for any speaker, any leader in any field. What's the process? How do you go from functional to riveting?
Well, you used a word there that, certainly resonated, authenticity. When I first started doing TV, I got out of golf, and basically I played and did a little TV in 2003, but full-time 2004. And I remember in 2003, I was doing a show with Tarico, and we went to commercial break, and he got to see sort of a run of video, 90 seconds maybe. Commercial break was 2 minutes, 90 seconds. So he would have had 15 seconds on the front end, 15 seconds on the back end to watch that video and think about what he was going to say to sort of close out the broadcast. When we came on, he just nailed every scene perfectly, as if he'd had a month to write to it.
Wow.
Afterwards, I said, that was just magnificent. And he said, well, I've been doing this a long time. And I said, okay, I've been playing golf a long time too. I don't shoot 62 every day. And he was humble, because he's a very, he's such a wonderful person to be around. But he said, look, it'll take about 10 years for you to hit your stride in this, which at the time I was like, wow, really? And he's like, yes, it will. You'll go through all these different stages. And for me, those stages were when I first got into television, was having this idea of who I wanted to be. And so, I wasn't very good, I'd have to say. The thoughts didn't come to me as quickly. I couldn't get my arms around the subject matter in the way I wanted to. And was inauthentic. And I remember at some point, a couple of years into it, where I thought, look, here's all you can do. You can prepare, you have to prepare, because it takes a long time to have something to say. I mean, there's a difference between talking because you have to say something and talking because you have something to say. So you have to prepare. And then you have to condense it all down into, sort of easily digestible, little quips or runs or sentences or thoughts, and then you have to have fun with it. And then you have to say it in a way that is memorable or fun or entertaining or humorous. So it took a little while to find my way to that process, and then to not worry or care what people think, just to get up and let it go, so to speak. And that took 3, 4, 5 years. It really did. But along the way, again, it's not uncommon in a week to have to talk every single night about the same person or subject. Certainly in the Tiger Woods era, I went in, I was doing an interview once, and I said, I'm about to go in, and I did the math. I'm about to go in and do my 5,000th Tiger Woods breakdown. And so to try to say something different and come at Tiger from a different angle every single time was a challenge, but I look forward to it. So, it takes a little while to find your voice. It takes a little while to figure out what information is relevant. And along the way, and I say this to anybody who asks me about trying to be a communicator, I said, you have to read as broadly as possible.
Yeah.
Because if you just read the subject matter that's relevant to your game, to your particular sport or area, you will sound like everybody else you'll sound like everybody else. I once asked a fabulous writer by the name of Kurt Sanson, whose analogies and metaphors, they're so fresh. And I asked him why he didn't sound like any other golf writer. And he said, because I don't read any other golf writer. I read outside of the golf world broadly. And then as I come to my subject matter, I narrow my focus. So his analogies, metaphors, word choices, ideas, thoughts, they come from other areas. And then he can speak to golf in a fresh way. And I try to do that when I'm talking. I try to come up, different analogies, different word choices. It could be philosophical. It could be more historical. It could be a Shakespearean idea or quote. I've often said to Tiger that when we try to make comparisons about Tiger, that there are no precedents for Tiger, just as there were no precedents for Shakespeare. You could give everybody the same educational experience of Shakespeare. They're not going to write Hamlet. Right. And you can give every single golfer the same training as Tiger Woods, and they're not going to do the things that Tiger Woods did. And so, you go back and you try to figure out, how can I categorize these players in a fresh way? And it's a never ending labor of love.
I hope people realize that what you've just given us is a phenomenal public speaking course, because public speaking and communication is hard. I often say that great speakers are not born, they're made. And they're made through applying themselves and watching other great speakers, reading great writing, applying different ideas from different fields, a range of fields to their public speaking and to their content. What you just said reminds me of something that I've often written about. A great philosopher by the name of Aristotle, 2,000 years ago, gave us the formula for public speaking that we use today, which is ethos, logos, and pathos. All great speakers have to have all three if you want to engage your audience. Ethos being credibility. So you have that 15 years on the tour, check. Golf Channel, check. You have the credibility. Then there's the logos, which is the making the logical appeal to reason. And I think that's where you can break down statistics like no one else can. And so when you make a case or you back up an argument by comparing the winning percentage of Ben Hogan to contemporary golfers, that's you making a logical appeal to reason to back up your argument. But great speakers cannot influence an audience without what Aristotle called pathos, which is emotion, especially through story. And I think that's why people like you are interesting, because you can bring in those emotional aspects, and you can talk about Nietzsche and Ben Hogan and statistics and contemporary golfers and when they should hit a cut versus a draw. You can bring all of that in one tournament. That's what elevates your game to a completely different level. That's why I've watched your co-hosts or other people who have interviewed you with their jaws drop. They're like, wow, this guy does his research. But it's more than doing your research, and it's more than, people have called you one of the more intellectual sports analysts. Well, you can be intellectual and boring. I've seen plenty of that. It's that range that you're bringing to the table, which makes it interesting, or I would say riveting theater. It's hard to do, but I'm glad you said it takes time. You don't just jump into a role and do this. Great speaking is a skill, and it takes time.
Absolutely. You know, and when I see or somebody get up and give a great speech, you know, I pay attention to their cadence, their word choice, their mannerisms, all of those things, you know, their eye contact. But really, it's just their passion and excitement that comes through. I mean, someone can tell you, and I remember this exactly. I mean, when I first got into TV, they were like, sit this way, don't sit that way, or don't have a pen, you know, do this, do that. And I thought, wow, that's a lot to think about. And you know, you come off a show and there'd be somebody there going, well, you didn't get this right, or you didn't get that right, or you did this. And I realized a couple of years down the road, you know, I'd come off and oh, that was amazing. And you know, not that I watched a lot of it, because, you know, I lived it. I don't generally like to watch myself on TV, but inevitably it'll pop up somewhere. And I realized I did every one of those things that I was doing early, same ones. You put my hands this way, did that way, grabbed that way. But the thing is, they didn't pay attention to them because, you know, your style changes, your passion comes through. You know, you talk about Tony Romo, and it's his passion. It's like he's watching football as a little kid. You know, it's the passion that comes through. And when I watch telecasts of golf events, I go back and watch them, and I can tell when people have done their homework. Certainly, you can always tell that, but you can also tell when they're genuinely enjoying the broadcast.
Yeah, and
they're genuinely excited to share what they see that you might not see. You know, watch this. You got to watch this. No, seriously, dude, watch this right here. You know, and all of a sudden you're engaged, and that's what Romo does. And sometimes, you know, in research, I'm always going back and rewatching telecasts.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, sometimes somebody will go, yeah, that was a really nice shot. You know, somebody just clipped it off a hard panel eye over a bunker to a foot. I'm like, wow, no, that was such a great shot. It's like, you gotta give us a little more than that. And so, you know, it does take a long time, but it's generally, it's the passion. It's the passion to get it right. And it's a passion to tell good stories. And I think about this all the time. You know, our audiences out there, what do I owe the audience? I got to try to tell them something that's not obvious. And by the time we come on the air, almost everything that has or could be said has been said. And so you got to work really hard all day long, and then try to give our audience something that they might not have expected or might not have gleaned from the telecast.
I'm writing that down. Well, what do we give our audience? What do we owe our audience? Again, I think these are the reason why I'm talking to you. Very few people are ever going to be sports analysts, but they are public speakers, especially as leaders. And all of these things apply. If there is one piece of advice I'd love to offer players in any sport, it's that viewers like myself, we're not just watching to hear how you feel going into the clubhouse after your first round. Teach us something. Bring us inside the ropes. Teach us something about golf and about life, because you have a unique perspective that we'll never have. That's what makes people interesting. And you've got a few players on the tour who do that. I love Phil Mickelson. I've always enjoyed, you know, because he's funny and he's a storyteller, but he can also break down a swing and the physics of it like no one else. And I've also started to enjoy Bryson DeChambeau when he gives press conferences. He's like a motivational speaker. The way he thinks about hard work is fascinating. But give us a little something extra.
Well, along lines, and you're right. Bryson, and it sounds cliche, but recently he said something along the lines of, look, all I try to do is wake up every morning and be a little bit better than I was the day before.
That's right, a little better than the day before.
And that's Bryson.
Yeah.
He's explaining to us how he went from a guy, sort of a scrawny looking guy who swung 117 miles an hour to this beefed up guy who swings, 135 miles an hour. It's like, how did that happen? Well, this slow, gradual process of trying to be better every single day. Yeah. And Phil Mickelson, I can remember once in the media center being asked when he had yet to win a major championship, but had come so close for a decade. And somebody said to him, the question was something along the lines of, do all of these losses bother you? Have they piled up, and is there scar tissue? And he goes, well, they're just not losses. You can call them losses if you want to. He said, but there's 150 people in this event. I beat all of them by 2. He said, I'm getting better all the time. And he said, at some point, I'm not just going to win one major. I'm going to win many majors. And now here he is, 16, 17 years down the line from when he won his first one, with 6. And he's the oldest man to have ever won a major. So that sort of sanguine attitude matters. Yeah. But in general, I'll tell you this, one of the scariest, and I mean this, moments in my public speaking life was when I was asked to go before, it was a group of about 750 women entrepreneurs, CEOs, and give a speech to this, give a speech to this large group of very successful women. But the way it was communicated to me was, would you come be a part of a Q&A? Well, and I know that if you're asked to do a Q&A, of course, there's, you're being asked about your life. There's no prep work really involved.
Right.
You're just going to go sit down and enjoy the back and forth between whoever's interviewing. And I said, absolutely. So when I get there, I think Oprah Winfrey maybe was up speaking, or Rachel Ray, but that's the type of people that are in this room, right?
Right.
So as I get there, a couple of professional ladies come up and they're like, hey, listen, and I'm surrounded by a few other people that had brought me over there. And they said, we're so, look, now there's a speech going on up there and everybody's enjoying it. And ladies come over and I'm just off the stage. And she said, we're so looking forward to your speech. And I said, speech? And she goes, yeah, you're scheduled for a 45-minute speech. I said, oh, I thought I was meant to give it. I thought we were doing a Q&A. She goes, no, you're giving a speech.
And you're a guy who likes to research. You need to research.
Well, I mean, if you're going to give a speech, you definitely have a speech in your mind when you walk up there. And so now that I've got about 5 minutes before I have to go up, and this lady's talking to me, so I don't want to be rude and not be paying attention to her. But as I have one sort of ear on what she said, I have one ear, all of a sudden I thought, well, now I have to go up and talk. I'm not answering questions. And I said, now I've got one ear on what the speaker was saying. And so I thought, I've got a minute or two here to come up with a 45-minute speech. And I thought, well, look, everybody wants to know what it's like to talk on TV. I said, in my mind, I cobbled together some stories about mistakes I had made on TV.
Yeah.
And some of them are funny, some of them are not so funny, cobbled together those stories. And then, sort of life lessons along the way from those stories. And this was really it for me. It was like, and if I go up there and have a good time, they're going to have a good time. Because, if you see somebody speaking or talking and that they're nervous, they're fidgety, then all of a sudden you're pulling for them, you want them to do well, and you're hanging on their every word, kind of, but you're, so I thought, I'm just going to go up there and wing it and have a good time. And, of course, you need to remember the names of the people that preceded you and know the names of the people that are following you. It helps to have some detail about what they just said and details about what's about to be said. And you sort of have all those things in your mind. And it is also, it's all those detailed names are important.
Yeah.
And then I got up there and instead of giving a Q&A, I gave a 45-minute speech and my goal was to make them laugh because I wanted to laugh.
Yeah.
I genuinely wanted to laugh and have a good time. And it came off, I think it came off wonderful.
Yeah.
But, the prep work for that was seconds in my head. But the overriding thought in my head was tell some stories because nobody has, everybody listening to this is unique in their own way. They have stories unique to them.
Yes, no one has your stories.
Right. Anecdote. I remember when I first started getting into writing eons ago, a great writer by the name of Michael Bamberger came over to me and he said, never forget to tell your stories. Okay.
Yeah.
Because nobody's going to have your anecdotes. Nobody's going to have your stories. Tell them to the audience. They want to hear them. And it's cobble together some nice stories, have a bridge, have a point to be made, have a larger point, and never forget to have fun.
And always come back to the larger point. Should select those stories for that point. After the second round of the PGA Championship in May, the one that Phil Mickelson went on to win and making history at the age of 50, I believe you were speaking about the Ocean Course at Kiowa Island, and you said, this course is the Aaron Sorkin of golf courses. It keeps giving us unbelievable stories. Now, that statement can only be made from somebody who appreciates film, writing, and storytelling. So take us further, because you just mentioned stories. What role does storytelling play in engaging conversation?
Everything, really. I mean, you think, and Aaron Sorkin is amazing. And, you go read about writing and you'll come across Aaron Sorkin pretty quickly. And Aaron says that he hates the process of writing, that you're just staring at this blank screen and he thinks he's not up to the task. And he's look at it and it's like this war between him and this blank screen. And then you just Google Aaron Sorkin and you realize, this guy wrote The West Wing. He wrote A Few Good Men. I mean, you just keep going on and on. He touches everything. But you realize that it's not easy for Aaron Sorkin. He may make it look easy, and I think he's written some of the most clever dialogue in the last 20, 30 years, but you realize that it takes some time. You have to sit down and think. You have to be alone and think. Warren Buffett talks about this all the time. It's like very important for Warren Buffett, he says every day, to be alone and to think. So you have to turn everything off. You have to sit in a room and you have to think. And then you think, okay, I have a story to tell. What is the most entertaining way I can tell it? What is the most fun way I can tell it? There's a lot of different things that go through my head when I sit down and I'm getting ready for a show. I never forget a quote by Dan Jenkins, which when he sat down, Dan Jenkins is a great writer. He's passed away, but probably the most, I think, brilliant and humorous golf writer ever. And he would always say that, when he was asked, how do you get at your stories? How do you always have these wonderful paragraphs, opening paragraphs? And he said, I always look at the leaderboard and I say, what happened here? Simple as that. What happened here? And then how can I tell that story in a fun and exciting and entertaining way? Nora Ephron, who wrote so many great movies and was almost like the social commentator of my generation, Harry Met Sally and those types of films. Sure. She was famous for saying everything is copy. So, when I'm driving into work, I look around and I look at billboards and I look at signs and I'm looking for analogies and metaphors and anecdotes. Wow. And so everything's copy. What happened here? And then I always ask myself this: what's funny about what just happened? What's humorous about it? What's interesting about it? And what am I missing? What am I missing? And all of those things. And then you begin to sort of, it comes into focus a little bit more. And then I'll just sit down and I'll start writing, because I'll sit down and write, if I'm studying and getting ready for a major championship. I take the top 50 players in the world. I get all their data on various pages. And then I always ask myself, because the data should lead you to the story. The data is not the story. The data should lead you to a story. So the data is like, what happened? What did they do? And the story is why they did it. So I will get the data and then I'll sit down and I'll put it out. And I'm like, okay, now why? Why does this person win? Why does that person lose? Why is this guy great at that? Why is he not great at that? And then I'll try to write, some, 5 different paragraphs on each of those points. And then I'll say, okay, what are the biggest questions about this player? And then I'll try to write 5 different answers to those questions. And then I'll think, okay, what are the criticisms of those questions, or those are my answers? What could somebody say that contradicts that? And try to anticipate the criticism and the contradictions to anything I might say. And then I think, okay, how would I answer that? And then so I keep writing and keep writing and keep writing. And the idea is that, not to memorize this stuff at all, because if you try to talk having memorized, then it's stilted and you're nervous because you think, I'm going to forget that line. That line was so good. Rather than memorize, you just need to learn it. What does it mean? I always say, if all this paperwork, all these ideas, I can't remember a single one of them, what did it mean? What was the larger point of? And then I'll have in my head like one sentence as to what it all meant. Or a memory. Are you familiar? I know you are. Like memory houses, like you have them in your head, memory houses.
Sure, yeah.
In my head, I use those all the time. I walk into a house and say there's 20 rooms in a house, and I'll put a thought into each of those rooms. So that when I'm on the air, I just imagine walking through that house and I'm in this room. Oh, that's that thought. And I'll connect the thought to something in the room, or I'll go to the kitchen and I'll connect, and there's that thought. So,
wow.
And then you try to get all those thoughts. And then I always remember, you have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So when you get up, it's like, if I just remember the beginning, the middle, and the end, I can get there. I've got all these roads to get to the middle. And then I have all these roads to get to the end. And then you can just relax and listen. I know when I'm about to go on the air, if I'm not listening, then I won't speak as well. Because if you listen, then you have a conversation and you pick up on the mannerisms and the words, and then you don't repeat what somebody said beside you.
You've taught us so much, Brandel. Especially like people don't understand that you have to write first. You're writing down these stories. You're writing down the information, and then you're internalizing it. You're not necessarily memorizing it, but you're waiting, you're listening, and you're going to introduce those stories that are the most relevant. That reminds me of, I interviewed Neil deGrasse Tyson. And he does something very similar. He said, Carmine, I walk into interviews with a quiver of stories, anecdotes, metaphors, and I'm waiting. He calls it the rhetorical tool belt. And I'm listening and I'm waiting for just the right time to pull out that analogy.
He's terrific. And I love listening to him.
Yeah.
He's brilliant, and he's kind of, the new Carl Sagan. He lights that screen up and makes astrophysics interesting, the way Carl Sagan did. But what comes through is they're both passionate about it.
Yeah, passion, and he spends a lot of time doing what you do, thinking about how am I going to communicate this message to engage an audience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One of his interviews with Joe Rogan I recently watched, and Joe's terrific too. I mean, Joe Rogan is just so good. But I mean, we're lucky now that we can go online. And all of us can take this in and digest it in our own time and play it back and forth and back and forth. It used to just come on our screens once and it was gone. Now then you can go back and learn from these people.
Yeah. You had one fascinating insight. I'd just like to leave you one final note because it was so fascinating. And I have to ask you about this. You had a great theory about why some of the best coaches who coach elite golfers, why they did not necessarily make it on the PGA Tour, or those who didn't really reach a very high level. And then I believe you said that in relation to a criticism that you sometimes get. It's not my criticism, but I guess I've heard it where, he wasn't a top 10. It's like, dude, if you don't know what it means to spend 15 years on the tour, you need to do more homework about golf. But I think you said that in relation to a criticism. But here's what you said. Due to their struggle, I think you were talking about coaches who are great coaches, but they didn't play at an elite level. Due to their struggle, they communicate more effectively. Oh, I picked that out. That's insightful. Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and this is true of football coaches for the most part. It's true of soccer coaches. It's true of a fair number of commentators, even. Those that the game comes easy to, whatever game it is. They haven't spent necessarily, and this is a bit of a generalization, but generally speaking, they haven't spent as much time thinking about everything it takes to do the wonderful things that they're doing. I think I'm trying to think of the fellow who wrote this essay on Tracy Austin. I'll think of it in a minute, but essentially it was how disappointed he was in her autobiography. And that, it could have been so much more. But at the end, he came to this conclusion that those that are blessed with supreme athletic ability, they have reduced the game to its simplest form, and they really do not make the game more difficult. They'll say, well, I saw the ball and I hit the ball. I moved there and I did everything I needed to do to hit the cross court forehand. Dustin Johnson, if you ask Dustin Johnson how it's a great shot, like, well, I just think of the best shot I've ever hit before in my life with that club. Fred Couples along the same line.
They make it sound easy. Doesn't help me, but sounds easy.
That helps you be a great athlete. It really does.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily help you be a great commentator or coach. To be a great coach, you need to have thought hard, long, and deep about the techniques needed and the coaching sort of strategies. So, it's not unusual. You go back and look at Vinci Lombardi's football record, and it's there's a dearth of success there. And it's, that's a commonality amongst a lot of great coaches and players. So yeah, to have to think long and hard about technique, which I did when I was a player. I went to probably every top teacher, sat down, listened to their ideas and thoughts about the golf swing, toyed with them in my own. These are not necessarily the commonalities of the greatest players of all time, but if you want to communicate what what needs to happen in transition from backswing to downswing and do it 100 different ways, it helps to have worked on 100 different things. And so while the higher echelon of sporting athleticism, maybe I didn't get there, maybe I didn't win 20 times, but I thought about what the best did. And then I thought, well, how can you communicate that? And then one of the reasons I sat down to write Anatomy of Greatness was about the commonalities of the greatest players of all time. But you realize how hard it is to articulate the movements that players make when they're hitting these shots. And so to think about those things in advance certainly helps me. So, being a great coach requires a lot of thought. Being a great athlete, it requires eliminating a lot of thought. So the two are sort of incompatible, I would argue.
Well, you are endlessly fascinating. I look forward to much more riveting golf coverage in the years ahead. So, Brandel, thank you so much. You are a joy to watch.
I really appreciate that, Carmine. Thank you so much for having me on. It's very nice to meet you, and I look forward to reading your insights as time goes on over the years.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brandel.